Everybody, hope you had a good lunch. So I'm kicking off this session, really going to talk mostly about the technology behind these CZT scanners that we're seeing within the exhibition stand in some of our centres currently. That's my disclosures. So I guess, maybe what people are thinking is when we're talking about CZT, why should we go there? What is wrong with our traditional gamma camera with scintillation detectors? Well, nothing really, but we know that scintillation detectors are bulky, and that often limits the flexibility in the system design. They're actually quite inefficient because, as we know, when we think about the scintillation detector, there's a whole chain of things that have to happen before we actually get an electrical signal that we can deal with. For those applications where multi-radionuclide imaging is needed or required, it's actually quite difficult using scintillation detectors. And if you want to put a SPEC scanner in an MR field, if you're using a scintillation detector, they just don't work. So this is why scintillation detectors, we're going to talk about, semiconductor detectors now and what they might bring that can help us overcome some of the shortcomings of scintillation detectors. So how do these detectors work? It's really very simple. They work pretty much like an ionization chamber. So if you look at the left of the figure there, we've got our gamma or our X photon coming in to the semiconductor depletion layer. And what happens when that photon hits the depletion layer? It creates electrons and holes within the semiconductor. So if we apply potential difference across that semiconductor, we can collect that charge, we've got a signal, we can amplify it and shape it, and we have a count. And the nice thing here, as I said, the advantage over a scintillation detector where we've got the crystal, then the photocathode and the amplification, what's happening here is we're getting a direct conversion from that gamma or X photon directly into an electrical pulse. So an advantage, this is where semiconductor detectors can help us. But what options do we have? Well, there's a whole host there I've put up on the table. But what we've got to realize, one of the advantages is that we get quite a good signal from these semiconductor detectors. If we go for silicon or germanium, which have been used in the past, you find that if you're using them at room temperature, you get a signal out of them just because of the currents that are induced from the thermal, from the temperature of the surrounding environment. So you have to usually chill these silicon or germanium detectors. It's also quite difficult to produce quite pure germanium and silicon semiconductors. And what that happens is if you have impurities, you get electron traps, which means that when you get that gamma or X photon coming in, it might excite and go into these electron traps and not escape, so you reduce your signal. And the other issue we have with germanium and silicon is that it's a low atomic number as well, and we know that we need to have an atomic number and a density which is pretty good at stopping our 140 or higher energy photons. So what people would do with germanium or silicon is they would drift in some lithium ions into the semiconductor to create more excitation sites which can improve efficiency. So I'm talking a lot about germanium and silicon, but actually, I'm highlighting here that they've got some challenges, but there are two other players on the block, and that is cadmium telluride, which I highlight here, and cadmium zinc telluride, which have an appropriate density, and they produce a signal from quite a low energy, 4.43 or 4.6 electron volts of incoming signal. So, So which do we choose? Do we choose cadmium telluride or cadmium zinc telluride? Well, what we actually find is that if you put a little bit of zinc telluride into your cadmium telluride to produce CZT, it actually improves the performance for detections in the gamma and X photon range that we use in nuclear medicine. And this is why CZT is currently the preferred semiconductor detector for SPECT applications. Okay, so we've mentioned the detector, we've mentioned the type of semiconductor that we've got. So how do we get these into our SPECT scanners? Well, the way they usually are constructed is that you have pixelated detectors. So you'll have a detector that's about 2 to 3 millimeters square. And you build them up into an array, so you can then have an area detector. And you generally use a collimation that gives you one hole on your collimator to one of those square detector elements. So if you look at the image on the left, you can see a square array making up an area detector there, and this is what GE produce. And if you look at Spectrum, what they've done is they've taken a number of these types of blocks and put them in a longer array, and we'll see how they come together in imaging systems in a minute. So if we look at the CZT imaging systems that have been brought out over the years, I'm going to start with this breast imaging system. So scintillammography used to be a big thing in the noughties, and I think there's still a role for this. But GE brought out this scintillammography scanner based on CZT, and as you can see, they produced a relatively small detector, 15.7 by 24 centimeters, with good sensitivity and good spatial resolution and good energy resolution as well. And you can see the images on the right here, which are both from these from the same system, just with different energy windows. But you can see the images are really quite nice. But I think where probably CZT came to prevalence most, or certainly for people in the room, is when we think of the cardiac imaging systems that came out in the late noughties, the early 2010s. And the first one was from Spectrum Dynamics. And what they did is they took those arrays, they made 9 arrays of CZT detectors. You could get them really close to the patient. And then you had wide tungsten collimators, which I'm going to talk about a bit more in a minute. Then you would have these arrays of detectors swinging and pivoting on their axis to give you a whole bunch of projections so that you could image the heart. And you could go for a relatively wide field of view, or if you wanted to get sensitivity gains, you would only acquire projections over the heart. So we've seen these types of images before, but you could get a SESTA-MIMI image from 250, 850 megabec injections on a one-day protocol. You're imaging for 6 and 4 minutes, which of course is a huge time saving based on what you would do on a traditional scintillation detector system. Of course, GE brought out a system as well. Their solution was slightly different. Again, they had multiple CZT detector arrays, but this time they used multiple pinholes, as you can see here. So the pinholes were pointing towards the heart. You were focusing the acquisition on the heart. There was no detector motion in this instance. But again, you could get very quick stress and rest cardiac system, maybe scans from these types of systems. The reason why the technology started off with small field of views is that it's quite expensive to produce the purity in the CZT that you need. So therefore, it's difficult, it's expensive, and therefore they started off with relatively small detector arrays. But of course, GE eventually got to a point where they took their traditional dual detector gamma-camma configuration and removed the scintillation detectors and placed arrays of CZT detectors in the standard configuration systems. Of course, by doing this, you can do planar imaging and also SPECT imaging, which later systems only really focused on SPECT. So you have the flexibility to do a renogram, but also to do a SPECT scan. And some examples here of just some hand scans where you can see some improvements of image quality between the image on the left, which was from a scintillation detector system, and this was from this particular CZT system. So you get image quality improvements there. So of course, technology doesn't stand still, things move forward. So what happened next, of course, is that we had these finger detector systems originally from Spectrum Dynamics with the Veriton. So again, they were taking these detector arrays, they were putting them in these kind of finger arrangements. So you had 12 fingers, 32 centimeter actual field of view. And you could get quite good sensitivity on these systems, again, depending on whether you focused on a particular area, like the brain or the heart, or whether you needed to take the whole body. Advantages of these systems, and we'll go into this a little bit more detail later on, is that the energy resolution is very good. the spatial resolution with the pixelated detector is pretty good as well. And the detectors move in and out, and as we can imagine here, we know with a collimator our spatial resolution improves as we get the detector closer to the patient. And with this type of configuration, we can really get the collimators very close to the patient, and therefore we get some spatial resolution improvements. As well as these detectors moving in and out, you still need to get further projections, so they rotate round as well to give you a full range of projections. As I said, they've got focused and non-focused modes. And then, of course, GE came out with the Star Guide. They too had these finger detectors, slightly smaller actual field of view. Again, they had focused modes. Something that I haven't mentioned on the previous slide is that these systems tend to come in different thicknesses of CZT, which we'll come on to in a few minutes, why you might want to do that. Great energy resolution. And again, these detectors move in and out to minimize the distance between the patient and the collimator, and they rotate around to get the adequate number of projections. And again, you get these focused and non-focused modes. I want to talk about the collimation on most of these systems. So they're a little bit different because unlike with the scintillation detector system where you can change the collimators, you can put your high, your medium energy collimators on. I think with the exception of that 2-detector GE system, the detectors are fixed. The collimators you get are the collimators you get, which is a joy for many of our technologists who then think, yes, I don't ever have to change a collimator. But there's some challenges there as well. So typically, these collimators have been designed to be high sensitivity, and that's where some of the sensitivity gains are coming from in these systems. So for the D-spec, for example, as I said, the detector, the hole width matches the size of the detector, about 2.3 millimeters, but the length of the hole is really much shorter than you would see in a standard scintillation detector collimator. So it's 22 millimeters. Normally, you talk about 30, 40 millimeters on a standard system collimator. So it's a very high sensitivity. They make the holes of tungsten because they're trying to get sufficient attenuation of any oblique beam between the different detectors. So it needs to be a denser material than the lead used in typical collimators. But typically, the septa thickness have been optimized for lower energies. So it's good for when you're imaging technetium, but if you go to non-technetium, you can get some challenges. So let me just go through some of these performance things now. So I'm going to look at various different factors of how the scintillation detector systems and the CZT systems match up in terms of their energy resolution, their energy range, sensitivity, spatial resolution, and their count rate performance. We might mention cost. I think I've put cost here, but I don't think I've got a slide for it, but we'll touch on that briefly. So the energy resolution, these CZT systems, because they're working in a different way, because they're getting charged directly, it means that we're getting an energy resolution of around 5% compared to 9-10% in the scintillation detector system. So if you see in the figure below on the right there, we've got a whole range of radionuclides that we might see in nuclear medicine. We quite easily distinguish the peaks of each of those radionuclides, which you wouldn't be able to do in a scintillation detector system. So that helps improve our scatter rejection because then we can put narrow windows on it and we get a lot more good counts. So in theory, that means that if you wanted to do a dual energy thyroid, parathyroid, or HMP, or nioflupane, or maybe perfusion and a MRB innovation study, you could inject both radiopharmaceuticals and do dual radionuclide imaging. One thing I just want to point out a little bit actually about these curves is that if you look at the energy resolution, the full width half maximum energy resolution is quite good, but actually you'll see that they have quite long tails. On a scintillation detector, it would go down pretty much down to zero. That's not the case on the CZT. So because you get not all the charge being collected from the detector, so the energy resolution performance isn't perfect. It still gives us benefits on image quality. What about the energy range that we can use on these systems? I thought I was going to step this through. So technetium, as I said, these systems were really designed for technetium, so technetium is very good. iodine 123, again, it's only a little bit higher, so the performance is generally pretty good. What you've got to be careful with iodine 123, though, is that you get some low propensity but high energy photons from iodine 123 around the 500 keV mark. So you'll get more septal penetration, and you will see a general higher level of fog with these one collimators, one type of collimators on these systems if you image with iodine 123. So for lutetium-177, of course, therapy is where it's all at now. And we know that if you look at any recommendations, they suggest that you image lutetium at 208 keV. Now, the original systems would top out about 200 keV. So this higher energy window was out of range. But both GE and Spectrum now have thicker CZT systems, which allow you, with that increased stopping power, to image higher energy photons. And even with the Veriton now, the Spectrum will give you examples of some iodine 131 imaging they've done with very thick CZT crystals. The collimator is still a bit of a challenge, but you can put corrections on this. I said that the challenge with all of these higher energy stuff is we've still got that one collimator. So with a thin septa, we've got septal penetration challenges, and some of it can be corrected out, but it's better to have good data than try and correct for bad data. So when you look at these CZT systems, you'll see that everyone's doing scans really quickly. There's real sensitivity gains. But where do these sensitivity gains come from? It's a little bit of a mystery. Is it the detector? Well, we have that direct conversion, but actually, because our CZT semiconductors are really quite thin, they're not massively sensitive, actually. So the sensitivity is pretty low compared to a thicker sodium iodide crystal. There's less amplification in there. Said we have a thinner detector. So there is no sensitivity gains from CZT in these standard systems compared to scintillation systems. Does it come from the detector area? Not really, because if you look at the volume of detectors in each of these systems, even in these 12-finger systems, you have less area of detector than you would do in a double detector scintillation detector system. The collimator is where it's all at. I've already mentioned that these collimators are really high sensitivity, so we get a lot more counts in because of the collimator. And then you think, well, from my physics lessons, I remember if I get good sensitivity, I get poor resolution. So what we have to do is use resolution modeling and spectral reconstructions to try and bring back some of those resolution losses. So resolution modeling is pretty much default in these systems. And with that, you get noise reduction as well. As we know, if you use resolution modeling in SPECT, you can reduce the level of noise. But we've already mentioned the high energy challenges. And we've also mentioned that the other area you get the increased sensitivity from is when you can focus your acquisition. So if you're doing brain or cardiac scans, if you're only scanning over the brain or heart, you can get more relevant counts in the time that you're imaging. So what about the spatial resolution with these systems? The intrinsic resolution is better, generally. We work on these pixelated detectors, which are about 2.3 millimeters in size, so the intrinsic resolution is pretty good. And as we've said, the reconstructed resolution generally is the same as you would get with a scintillation detector. And if you applied resolution modeling on a scintillation system and on a CZT system, again, you would get similar spatial resolution. But the advantage with the CZT systems, or certainly with these, well, even with the cardiac system, is you can get the detectors very close. And as we said previously, if you can get the detectors close, then you get improved spatial resolution. And you get more consistent spatial resolution generally across the image, both mostly because of resolution modeling. Something people don't talk a lot about, but actually is, I think, becoming very important in post-therapy imaging, is the count rate performance of these systems is really quite good. So we can image really quite high count rates. So on this example from our group back in 2009, we were getting up to 150 kilocounts per second without any count losses, where on a scintillation detector, if you get above 60 or 70,000 counts per second, then you have issues. And as we know, if we're doing post-therapy imaging, we can have a lot of activity on board, so this is an advantage here. So I just thought I'd finish with some examples. I know we'll get more moving forward, but I'm just going to try and take a technical aspect on this. So I wanted to take a bone scan from the Veriton. So we've all seen the papers, but you can quite clearly do a whole body SPECT in the same time it takes you to do a whole body planar image. You get good quality imaging. Obviously, you can do single section SPECT a lot quicker. And one thing I haven't mentioned so far, of course, is what's happening with these modern systems now, both CZT and scintillation detector systems, is SUV SPECT is being baked in, so we can actually quantify the uptake in terms of activity concentration or SUV in these modern systems as well. If I take an example of Adapt Brain, taken on the Star Guide, and I want to acknowledge Swansea here for providing these images for me. So these images, I think, were done in about 20 minutes, which is a little bit quicker than you would get on a scintillation detector, and it's mostly because you're using this focused mode. But you can see quite clearly in these images that you're getting good striatal definition and good characterization of non-specific uptake. The images actually look really quite good. And you don't see those septal penetration challenges in this particular reconstruction that you would think might be more of an issue, but it isn't. And cardiac on the Star Guide, I could have showed a D-SPECT image as well, but again from Swansea, a nice image on the Star Guide. And again, we're getting quite quick images here. I think this one was 6 minutes. And again, that's because of that focused acquisition. And on the GE system as well, you're getting all these modern Q-clear types of reconstructions as well, which can give you benefits too. And you can see generally from the images, they just look good image quality. These advanced reconstructions can help us as well. And so I also wanted to mention the lutetium-177 imaging, because I think for those of us who are in the market for a CZT imaging system, this is kind of a key thing for us. So this is from Laura Vergard in Lyon. So she was imaging lutetium-177 at various cycles. Again, these things never project as well as you would like. But you can see the imaging is really quite nice. And they were imaging, I think these were 20-minute whole body. Oh no, 24-minute. For cycle 1, that image took 24 minutes to get a vertex to mid-thigh SPECT scan, which I think is rather remarkable, really, compared to a scintillation system. What she did do in the work is that she was actually imaging at 113 kV rather than 208 kV, but she still managed to get good quality and quantitative images from her Veriton for this work. So I think that's very promising. And as I said, these newer systems are now out there that are allowing you to image up to the 208 kV peak as well. So I think we're already in a good place for lutetium-177 imaging on these systems. And as time goes by, we'll get better again. So in summary, so I think obviously CZT technology has revolutionized SPECT systems design in recent times. And it's nice to think, the old gamma camera has been around for almost 70 years. So it's nice to think that actually we're updating the technology. PET's seen quite dramatic changes in technology, but the CZT, or in SPECT, we haven't really moved very far, but in the last 10 years or so, we're making big strides, and I think they're really positive strides as well. We're getting improved image quality through better contrast, better spatial resolution, and we're getting some sensitivity benefits as well. So we're getting benefits in productivity and outcomes as well. There's still some challenges. I said one collimator working for all energies is a real challenge, but there are algorithms out there, and no doubt our friend artificial intelligence will come in and help us out a bit there too. One thing I haven't mentioned about these CZT systems as well is the cost. They're significantly more expensive than a scintillation detector system. So you might get some productivity gains, but I suspect it's not going to match the increase in cost that you'd be making. So, and as I said, I think SPECT's at an exciting time at the moment. I think this morning we were talking about traditional nuclear medicine being important, the old bone scan being important, and so with bone scintigraphy, brain scintigraphy, and the increase in theranostics and quantitative SPECT generally, I think it's really nice to see these developments in SPECT systems, so we can push our field forward. So on that, I would just thank you for listening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. We've got time for just a couple of questions. Does anyone wish to ask any questions at this point before we move on?
I've got a question while someone's thinking. John, what about fixing the collimators on traditional gamma cameras and getting the upscaling?
Yeah, so I'd rather get it right the first time. So if you have the right collimator for the right job, it's better to get all the counts right up front rather than having loads of bad counts and then trying to correct for it. But yeah, wouldn't it be nice not having collimator changes? I think that would be a nice world to live in, wouldn't it? So maybe with artificial intelligence, we will just have one collimator to rule them all. Maybe it's possible.
And what about changing the collimators on a multi-finger system?
I think it's really tough because you need to match them to those CZT detectors. And for those people who've got the dual detector systems where you can change the collimator, I think it's a real challenge to make sure that the hole is sitting over that 2.3 millimeter detector. So, yeah.
Great, thanks.
Okay.